Around 1200 BC, something went terribly wrong. In a matter of decades, the most powerful civilizations on Earth simply stopped existing. The Hittite Empire, which had stood as Egypt's greatest rival, vanished completely. Mycenaean Greece, the world of Agamemnon and Achilles, fractured into isolated villages. Along the Levantine coast, wealthy trading cities that had thrived for centuries burned to the ground. Evidence from Troy shows that even the legendary city fell during this period. Its walls were breached, its streets were left covered in arrowheads, spear points, and burnt remains. Egypt, Babylonia, and Assyria survived, but just barely. Their influence shrank, their provinces slipped away, their treasuries ran dry. What came out of the wreckage of the Bronze Age was a world that looked nothing like what came before. So at the center of this upheaval were a group of people Egyptian scribes called the Sea Peoples, an informal coalition of tribal groups whose attacks helped push the Bronze Age world past its breaking point. Who were they? Where did they come from? And what happened to them after the dust settled? The answers are scattered across temple walls, clay tablets, ancient letters written in panic, and the work of archaeologists who are still piecing it together today. What has emerged is one of the strangest and most debated stories in all of ancient history. And it starts, surprisingly, not at the moment of collapse, but more than a century before it, with a single violent raid on Egypt's coastline that almost no one remembers. Here is something most people don't realize. The Sea Peoples didn't appear out of nowhere at the moment of collapse. When Egypt had already been dealing with them for over a century, and the very first encounter on record didn't end the way the Sea Peoples planned. In the second year of Ramesses II, a group called the Shurden launched a pirate attack on Egypt. They came by sea, striking the Nile Delta with enough force to alarm the entire court. Ramesses II defeated them and took many captive. His inscription, recorded on the Tanis Stele, describes the threat they posed with striking language. The unruly Shurden, whom no one had ever known how to combat, came boldly sailing in their warships from the midst of the sea, none being able to withstand them. And yet Ramesses withstood them. He defeated them, captured them, and then did something unexpected. He recruited them. The Shurden captives were absorbed into the Egyptian army, and by 1274 BC, down when Ramesses II clashed with the Hittite king Mu'attali II at the Battle of Kadesh in what is now southern Syria, the Shurden were fighting on the Egyptian side, serving as the pharaoh's personal guard. Think about that for a moment. Pirates who had attacked Egypt were now protecting its king in one of the most famous battles of the ancient world. That tells you something important about the Sea Peoples. They were not simply destroyers. They were survivors, skilled fighters who adapted to whatever world they found themselves in. The question is, what pushed so many of them to leave their homelands in the first place? The first real clue comes in 1208 BC when the next wave arrived, and this time they brought their families. Soldiers on the move Travelite. But what happened in 1208 BC was something different. Something that told Egypt this was not just another raid. A Libyan prince named Marius formed an alliance with several tribal groups that Egyptian scribes would later identify as Sea Peoples. When they came to Egypt, they didn't come alone. They came with their wives, their children, their elderly relatives, and wagons piled high with everything they owned. These were not raiders looking for plunder. These were people looking for a new home. The invasion is recorded in a long inscription on the walls of the temple at Karnak. The battle was brutal. Egyptian records claim more than 6,000 invaders were killed and over 9,000 were taken prisoner, along with their families and all their belongings. Pharaoh Merneptah announced a decisive victory. The Karnak inscription lists the groups by name: the Ekwesh, Teresh, Luka, Shurden, and Shekelesh. Some Merneptah's scribes describe them as northerners who came from every land and as desperate people who spend their days marching and fighting to fill their bellies. They came to Egypt, the inscription states plainly, in search of food for their mouths. That detail matters more than it might seem. These were not conquerors with imperial ambitions. They were displaced populations, driven by hunger and instability, searching for somewhere to go. Egypt was simply where they headed. Merneptah stopped them. But Egypt's relief lasted only 30 years because the Sea Peoples came back. And this time, the inscription they left behind on the walls of a mortuary temple describes something so large and so sudden that it reads almost like the end of the world. What the temple walls of Medinet Habu describe is not just an attack, it is a complete unraveling. Reading the inscription today, even at a distance of 3,000 years, the scale of it is difficult to absorb. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once, the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms, from Hatti, Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Alashia, cut off at one time. Translation: in one sweeping movement, entire kingdoms that had existed for centuries simply ceased to function. The Hittite Empire, Arzawa, Alashia, gone, destroyed or displaced before the sea peoples even reached Egypt. A camp was set up in one place in Amuru. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which has never come into being. And they were coming forward toward Egypt while the flame was prepared before them. The inscription names their confederation, the Peliset, Cheker, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Weshesh. It records their confidence with cold clarity. Their hearts confident and trusting. Our plans will succeed. They attacked from both land and sea. Rameses III first defeated their forces in a land battle at Jahi. Then he lured their fleet into a trap in the Nile Delta, where he destroyed them. His account of the naval battle is merciless. Those who came forward together on the sea, the full flame was in front of them at the river mouths, while a stockade of lances surrounded them on the shore. They were dragged in, enclosed, and prostrated on the beach, killed, and made into heaps from tail to head. Egypt survived. But just beyond Egypt's border, then one of the wealthiest cities in the ancient world was already burning, and we know this because of the letters. Most of what we know about ancient disasters comes from the winners, but sometimes the losers left records too. The letters that survived from the city of Ugarit are unlike almost anything else from the ancient world, because they were written by people who knew they were running out of time. Ugarit was a large and wealthy trading city on the Syrian coast, one of the great commercial hubs of the Bronze Age. We have a letter written by its king, Hammurapi, to the king of Alashia. The desperation in it is unmistakable. My father, behold, the enemy ships came, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Luca? Thus the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us. So if any more enemy ships arrive, let me know so that I can decide what to do. Hammurapi also wrote in panic to the Hittite viceroy at Carchemish, I wrote you twice, thrice, news regarding the enemy. May my lord know that now the enemy forces are stationed at Rasu, and their avant-garde forces were sent to Ugarit. Now may my lord send me forces in chariots, and may my lord save me from the forces of this enemy. Troops from Carchemish did set out to help, but they arrived too late. A report from the Hittite viceroy survived, and it is among the most haunting sentences in all of ancient history. When your messenger arrived, Shem the army was humiliated and the city was sacked. Our food in the threshing floors was burnt, and the vineyards were also destroyed. Our city is sacked. May you know it. May you know it. So now the question becomes, who exactly were these people? Where did they come from? Here is where the story gets genuinely complicated, because the answer is different for almost every group. Start with the most recognizable name, the Peliset. In the reliefs at Medinet Habu, they are shown wearing feathered headdresses and fighting on both land and sea. The prevailing scholarly view identifies them with the biblical Philistines. Egyptian sources say that after their defeat by Rameses III, the Peliset settled on the southern coastal plain of Canaan. Over time, they formed a confederation of 5 cities: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza. They developed a culture in which Aegean elements blended with local Canaanite influences. The Philistines remained a significant political and military force in the region until the Assyrian and Babylonian conquests of the 8th to 6th centuries BC. After that, they gradually disappeared, leaving behind only the name of their land, Philistia, from which the modern word Palestine ultimately derives. Where the Peliset came from originally is still debated. Most scholars point to the Aegean, especially Crete and Cyprus, based on material culture and a handful of linguistic clues. The Philistine ruler, for example, was called a Sarin, a word that resembles the Greek tyrannos or the Hittite tawanis. But so little is known about the Philistine language that firm conclusions remain out of reach. Now, some researchers have noticed that the pre-Greek inhabitants of the Balkans were called Pelasgioi. The resemblance to Peliset is interesting, but resemblance alone is not evidence, and most scholars treat the connection as unproven, even if it fits well with other signs of an Aegean origin. That still leaves 6 other groups to account for. The next one comes with a very different kind of evidence. The group known as the Luca may be the easiest of the sea peoples to place, and their story stretches across several centuries in a way that lets us trace their movements more clearly than most. In the late Bronze Age, Luca referred to a region in southwestern Anatolia. Scholars generally agree that the later place names Lycia and Lyonia derive from the same root. The earliest possible reference to the Luca people comes from the Phoenician city of Byblos, where an obelisk of King Abishmu, who ruled around the turn of the 19th and 18th centuries BC, contains an inscription mentioning someone named Kukun, son of Luca. After that, the Luca vanished from written records for nearly 4 centuries. Their next appearance comes in the Amarna letters of the mid-14th century BC. There, the Egyptian pharaoh accuses the king of Al-Ashia of sheltering the Luca, who were raiding Egyptian lands. The king of Al-Ashia responds that he himself suffers constantly from their attacks. Hittite texts from the same period list the Luca among lands paying tribute to the Hittites. The Luca were skilled seafarers and pirates. When Hittite archives are filled with letters from coastal cities and client states complaining about their raids, unlike their neighbors, the Luca were not united under a single ruler. A contingent from Luca even fought alongside the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh, but roughly a century later, they turned against their former allies. The last known Hittite king, Suppiluliuma II, campaigned against them and claimed victories, but apparently never fully subdued them. During the Bronze Age collapse, the Luca appear to have played a direct role in destroying the Cretan cities and in the fall of Ugarit. Homer, writing centuries later, seems to have remembered one of their raids without fully knowing it. Homer wrote the Odyssey more than 3 centuries after the Bronze Age collapse. But buried inside, it is a passage that reads like a first-hand account of exactly the kind of coastal raid that sea peoples carried out during that era. The passage describes an Aegean raiding party that sets sail for Egypt with 9 ships, hoping for plunder. What they find instead is disaster. 9 ships I manned, equipped with ready stores, intent to voyage to the Egyptian shores. In feast and sacrifice, my chosen train 6 days consumed. The 7th, we plowed the main. Safe through the level seas we sweep our way. The 5th, fair morn, we steer the Egyptian tide, and tilting o'er the bay the vessels ride. To anchor there my fellows I command, and spies commissioned to explore the land. But swayed by lust of gain and headlong will, the coast they ravage and the natives kill. The spreading clamor to their city flies. You and horse and foot in mingled terror rise. Jove thundered on their side, our guilty head. We turn to flight, the gathering vengeance spread on all parts round, and heaps on heaps lie dead. Most scholars connect the group called the Ekwesh with the Mycenaean Greeks. The phonological similarity between Ekwesh and the Greek Akaiwoi is clear, and late Hittite records frequently mention pirate raids by the Ahiawa. Greek naval activity in the eastern Mediterranean during this period is also confirmed archaeologically. Off Cape Gelidonia, a Greek warship dating to around 1200 BC was found, loaded with Mycenaean bronze weapons and armor. But there is a problem. The Karnak inscription says clearly that the Ekwesh were circumcised, and the Mycenaean Greeks did not practice circumcision. One possible explanation is that these were Greeks who had settled in Canaan and, through intermarriage with the local population, adopted local customs, including circumcision. But it remains an open question, and it points to a pattern that runs through the entire Sea People's story. The further you look into the origins of each group, the more the theories multiply, and the more you realize how much of what we think we know rests on nothing more than the similarity of names. Take the Shekelesh. One popular theory links them to Sicily, where a people called the Sicoloi lived in historical times. Archaeology shows the Sicoloi appeared in Sicily at the end of the 2nd millennium BC, which lines up roughly with the Bronze Age collapse. Ancient writers, including Thucydides and Dionysius of Halicarnassus, You say the Sicoloi once lived in central Italy but were pushed out and eventually ended up in Sicily. The Roman author Marcus Terentius Varro noted that the Sicoloi language was closely related to Latin. But Hittite documents refer to a people called the Shikalayu who live on ships, which most scholars believe is another name for the same group. The Hittites knew the peoples of Anatolia extremely well. If the Shekelesh had been Anatolian, it is unlikely they would have described their home as ships. That detail points to an overseas origin. Historian Eric Klein, author of 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed, has suggested that the Shekelesh, like several other sea peoples, came from the Aegean world and began migrating after the fall of the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations. He links the Sicoloi of Sicily to the Shekelesh, but argues they only reached Sicily after the events of the collapse itself, not before. The story of the Shurden follows a similar pattern of competing theories built on the same thin foundation. Their name shares the consonant cluster SRDN with the island of Sardinia. When archaeologists started digging there, what they found was genuinely surprising. Sardinia, in the late Bronze Age, was home to the Nuragic culture. Its people built massive stone towers called nuraghi, carried round shields and bronze swords, wore horned helmets, and by every available piece of evidence, were highly capable seafarers. Ship depictions and ship models have been found across the island. When you compare Egyptian illustrations of Shurden warriors to what archaeology tells us about the Nuragic people, the resemblance is difficult to dismiss. But here is the problem that haunts almost every sea people's identification. It is impossible to say with certainty whether the Shurden originated in Sardinia and later raided Egypt, or whether they were defeated by Egypt, resettled, and eventually migrated to Sardinia afterward. The same uncertainty shadows the Teresh, whom many scholars connect to the Tirsanoi or Tyrrhenians of Greek sources, the people the Romans would later call the Etruscans. Herodotus says the Tirsanoi came from Lydia in Anatolia, driven out by drought and famine, and settled in northern Italy. Troy itself appears in Hittite sources under a name resembling Teresh, and Roman legend held that the founders of Rome descended from Trojan migrants. On the surface, it fits together almost perfectly. But the archaeology pulls in a different direction. The Etruscan predecessor culture, the Villanovan, only appears around 900 BC, roughly 3 centuries after the Bronze Age collapse. Genetic studies show strong continuity between the Etruscans and the earlier Bronze Age population of the Italian peninsula. There is no evidence of a sudden migration or foreign arrival at the relevant time. What the Sea Peoples left behind was not one story, but many, scattered, overlapping, and still unresolved. Some became the Philistines. Some may have become the Etruscans. Some were absorbed into Egypt itself, their names disappearing into a world that was already becoming